Did you know that at one point Mass Effect was going to have its own Nintendo DS game? It was originally in development in 2008 and it was going to be called Mass Effect Corsair. There's very little that we actually know about this game, but in the BioWare 25 book, John Epler described it as Mass Effect Freelancer, and later on, producer Mark Dara described it as a game similar to something like Star Control. And if you know anything about Freelancer or Star Control, then you know why those direct comparisons would be incredibly exciting for a Mass Effect game. So today we're going to be taking a look back at what Mass Effect Corsair was, what it could have been, and ultimately what became of it. Hello and welcome to the Exalted March. First and foremost, let's just establish up front here that there isn't really a lot definitively known about Mass Effect Corsair. One of the only primary official sources of information that we have is a short description in a sidebar section of the official BioWare 25 studio history book. Since it's so short, I can go ahead and read what it says. After the release of Sonic Chronicles: The Dark Brotherhood, the small games group at BioWare began development on a third-person space shooter for the Nintendo DS called Mass Effect Corsair. The spin-off featured a behind-the-ship perspective, branching dialogue, and at one point even multiplayer gameplay. The idea of Corsair was Mass Effect Freelancer, says then QA term tester John Epler. Fly your ship around, do missions, get credits. The branching story in the game was there, but limited. The team instead focused on a gameplay-centered experience aiming to occupy the release gap between Mass Effect and Mass Effect 2 that was instead filled by Mass Effect Galaxy. After Corsair crashed, its developers moved on to BioWare Labs or larger projects in development at the time, including Dragon Age Origins and Mass Effect 2. And as far as officially sanctioned information, that is literally all that I could find. There are some old news mentions of BioWare potentially working on a Mass Effect DS game, but nothing specifically about Corsair or what it was planned to be. Only recently was there another interesting, albeit brief, mention of Mass Effect Corsair, which was actually on Mark Dara's personal YouTube channel. Mark Dara is of course a former BioWare developer who is most known for his work on Dragon Age, but also worked on Jade Empire, Baldur's Gate, Neverwinter Nights, and Anthem, and he was also the producer for Mass Effect Corsair. Dara briefly mentioned Corsair in a video back in March of this year and said that Corsair was, quote, a game similar to something like Star Control. Additionally, while I was writing and researching for this video, Mark Dara joined Ben Hansen, formerly of Game Informer, over on his YouTube channel MinMax for an interview and talked about Corsair a bit more. He once again mentioned Star Control as a direct comparison, but also mentioned Wing Commander Privateer, and these comparisons are super interesting to me. If you're not familiar, Star Control, and perhaps more notably Star Control 2, were space flight strategy games released in the early 90s and were considered huge, expansive games for their time. You could travel to different star systems, explore planets, encounter and interact with alien species, and although by today's standards the visuals would not hold up, back then it felt like an immersive way to explore the galaxy. Freelancer, in comparison, was more linear but also captured the feeling of a wide-open, expansive galaxy, and also managed to produce a flight model that even today is remembered as one of the best spaceflight games ever. Freelancer was of course designed by Chris Roberts, who's famous for having made Wing Commander and is now currently heading up development on Star Citizen, the spiritual successor to Freelancer. Dara also gave some key details such as cargo selling, exploring and selling exploration data like planet locations to the Human Systems Alliance, and the fact that the game would take place in a slightly more lawless part of the galaxy. In his interview with Hansen, he couldn't quite remember the lore specifically, but from what he describes, it sounds like either the Terminus systems or the Attican Traverse. Ben Hansen asked if it took place in Batarian space, and while Dara couldn't remember exactly since this was more than a decade ago, it sounded like that may have been right, and since Batarians are highly prevalent in the Terminus systems, that could actually fit. So it sounded like we would have had a game with a strong flight model system, ship combat, exploration, branching dialogue, cargo and trading, and more. If you combine all of that with Mass Effect specific lore and setting and even a halfway decent story, you've got what could have been a pretty cool game. This is honestly a concept that I would still like to see BioWare explore at some point. Although this is definitely a canceled project that isn't coming back, I would still hope at some point down the road they can reuse some of these concepts for a future title of some kind, either on the Switch or iOS, or some other smaller form factor platform besides just PC and next-gen systems. We know obviously Mass Effect Galaxy on mobile is sort of the replacement that we got for Corsair, which is, no offense to Galaxy, just not nearly as interesting. I actually played it back in the day, and it's not a bad mobile game, but nothing that would have really held my interest if I wasn't already a huge Mass Effect fan. Corsair sounds like something that would actually appeal to a large number of people, including those who rightly observe that Mass Effect has actually always been rather light on actual space exploration, except for maybe ME1. Obviously, I love Mass Effect, but it's more about epic science fiction storytelling, character dynamics, and sci-fi themes than it is about exploration and gameplay. Exploration plays big thematically in Mass Effect, and also in the plot, but not necessarily in the gameplay. It would be nice at some point to see that in the gameplay of Mass Effect, even if, maybe especially if, it's done in a side game that is a slightly smaller project. But I want to know what you all think. Would you like to see a Mass Effect game of this type, maybe on the Switch, or maybe even on Xbox or PlayStation or PC? How many of you have actually played Star Control or Freelancer or heard of those games before? And would you ever like to see Mass Effect take on something like the size and scale of Star Citizen, or is that getting too big and too overbroad? Leave a comment down below and let me know what you think. If you like this video, please consider hitting the like button, and if you'd like to be informed of all future videos, please consider hitting the subscribe button and the bell notification icon. More Mass Effect stuff is coming up naturally. I imagine some of you are nearing the end of Mass Effect 3 if you haven't beaten it already, and maybe could use some tips about getting that perfect quote-unquote ending. I'll be covering that and more in future videos, so feel free to stick around for that, and as always, thanks for watching, and thank you for listening.